Good morning, folks. Thank you very much, as ever, for tuning in to the news at Ben. I hope you've all had a brilliant week. Now, today we will be showing the second segment of the interview that I had with the brilliant Ayaan Hirsi Ali about 10 days ago. I hope you've had an opportunity to watch the first segment. And if you did, and if you enjoyed it, listening to her as much as I enjoyed listening to her, I hope you will tune into the second segment. But before we go to that, I thought I'd just give a few comments on the phenomenal election results of Thursday. Make no mistake, those results were seismic. When Reform UK got its first seats in Parliament last July, that was a bridgehead for reform that changed the political dynamic in this country. We went from a two-party system. I don't really count the Lib Dems as a serious political party. We went from a two-party system to actually a serious political force now having representation in Parliament. And that was a bridgehead on which Reform UK could build. And my goodness, the people have really come out in favour of Reform UK now. The results on Thursday, they were not a protest vote. They were a vote for dramatic change in the way this country is governed. And actually, they follow 4 previous votes of the same kind. Obviously, the referendum in 2016, which again was a massive turnout, a massive kick in the shins for the establishment, wanting the Parliament to take back control of the country from Brussels. Of course, it never happened. And then we had Theresa May being returned to office in 2017 with a vote with a promise to deliver Brexit. And then, of course, the 2 elections in 2019, the first returning to the European Parliament, the Brexit Party, and then Boris Johnson, who stood on a ticket to get Brexit done, which effectively was taking back control of the United Kingdom. And all of those votes were pretty emphatic, especially the one for Boris Johnson and the referendum before that, as well as the European elections. And the fact we got a Labour government last year was not a result of people wanting Labour. It was a result of people despondent of having voted for wanting to take back control and our political class not delivering it. Labour got their landslide majority actually on fewer votes than they got in 2019 when they were led by Corbyn. This was no love of Labour that delivered him into office. But it was obviously disappointing that we got a Labour government. Now, what Reform has managed to do is turn UK politics completely on its head in the last couple of days. The vote on Thursday was, as I say, not a midterm blues protest vote. It was an emphatic vote again for change. Now, some of you may be wondering why it is that I'm celebrating that vote, given that I advocated not to vote for Reform. Of course, I couldn't advocate to vote for Reform. That would be completely wrong, because I don't believe that Nigel Farage has what it takes to turn Reform into the kind of electoral force that's required to save our country. Nigel Farage hasn't democratised the party, there aren't checks and balances in place, and of course we've heard him say some really weird things like a united Ireland is inevitable, that he's not against he's not concerned about the rate of demographic change in this country. He's not in favour of deporting every single illegal migrant that comes here. And of course, the candidate that he put up for Runcorn, a lady called Sarah Potchin, was welcoming illegal migrants into her constituency, was supporting a transgender event, and was also advocating, by the way, for the withdrawal of the winter fuel allowance from the elderly. So there's a lot that's wrong with Reform, but I celebrate the vote on Thursday because it was an emphatic reaffirmation that the country wants change. And that change will come through Reform or through some other vehicle. That change will come. So I'm hugely encouraged that the people are still with us. The people are still with the movement. And I want to thank everyone who campaigned for Reform on Thursday, even though I advocated against it, because what you've done is prove that the country wants change. Now it is down to people like Nigel Farage and others, and myself, Rupert Lowe, etc., to make sure you get that change. And certainly, I know I'm speaking for Rupert Lowe and myself when I say we will not leave the battlefield, particularly encouraged as we are by the vote of support that you gave on Thursday. We will make sure you are not let down. Now, without further ado, I hope you'll enjoy this second segment of my brilliant interview, or my interview rather, with the brilliant Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Thank you very much, folks.
The question I think that every Westerner is avoiding today is it possible, given the demographics of today, the birth rates, immigration, and so on, is it possible for Islamists to come to power peacefully through the ballot box?
Can I go back one question, one step, and ask a slightly different question, which is, do you think Islam is compatible with democracy? Certainly Western democracy, the way we practice them. Are they compatible in any sense?
If you define democracy as holding elections, Muslims will hold elections to come to power, and then they will abolish democracy, and they will say no more elections.
Yeah.
And
so the ultimate destination of Islamism is the end of democracy.
It is the end of democracy. It's the application of Sharia law. It is to say an Islamist does not believe that human beings can make laws. An Islamist wants to apply God's law, Sharia law, as he sees it. And so wherever Islamists take control, that's the first thing that they do. They come in and they say, as of now, when the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, the Taliban in Afghanistan, and in places people don't care about and never look to, but places like Mali, parts of Niger, parts of the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, parts of Somalia, everywhere when the Islamists come out of Aceh in Indonesia, when they come to power, what they try to do is to apply Islamic law or Sharia law. And they spell that out. They say it. It's one of those really important things where you shouldn't be listening to experts who talk and speak and analyze Islamists. You should listen to the Islamists themselves and what they tell you.
Of course, which is the antithesis of free speech, obviously.
Yeah.
And free speech is, as we all know, a cornerstone of democracy.
Absolutely.
So just bringing it to the UK, if I may, for a second. The 2021 census had the UK with 3.9 million Muslims. That was 2021. We've actually had 5-6 million people since then come to the UK. The net migration's obviously been lower. I think it's about 2.5-3 million net migration. But, the change in the nature of our population has been quite dramatic. I suspect the number of Muslims in this country is materially higher now than 3.9 million. We also know that in the UK, once you come here, whether you come here legally or illegally, we seem incapable of either deporting those who've come illegally or, encouraging those who've come legally to go back to their home countries. People come here and they stay here. They have indefinite leave to remain. They get British passports. It doesn't seem to be a privilege anymore to get a British passport. It seems to be a right,
yes.
And they get it. And how do we... And we practice this regulatory framework of DEI, which is the protective status given to minority religions, ethnicity, minority sexual preferences, transgender identity. Any minority gets the benefit of protection. Multiculturalism, in effect, which I completely agree is divisive. How do we solve the issues facing the United Kingdom? What needs to be done, Ayaan, to make sure that our children and their children have a peaceable, democratic system which is sustainable, won't be hijacked, but is brought about also peaceably through debate, through the democratic processes that we have? Because one of the things I feel is that, as you touched on this so brilliantly in the beginning when you said that, you see the divisions being created, you see the language becoming more aggressive, and then suddenly there's a civil war.
Yeah.
And, how do we... And I can see ructions in the United Kingdom and ethno-nationalists now emerging in a way that they weren't before. And I also believe, forgive me, I'm talking a bit too much since...
No, you're not. I'm listening.
Yeah.
I'm really, really fascinated by what you're saying. Yeah.
But the other thing I fear is that people will start justifying the ends by the means.
Yes.
And I don't think you can ever justify the ends by the means, because if the means are draconian and damaging, the end is never delivered. And you end up in a kind of dystopia that you didn't wish to create.
Yeah.
So how do we navigate ourselves back to the kind of country which is welcoming, kind to foreigners, loving by nature and so on, democratic, that delicate political constitutional framework that we have, without having to take draconian steps? Is it possible?
Well, I think the way to do it is for us to recognize the urgency, to acknowledge the urgency of the situation. Again, when I was referring to my childhood, there were all these moments when unity could have been found among the various factions, and we could have said, well, let's opt for order, because what comes after this, if we carry on with these divisions, is going to be disorder. And eventually that's what a civil war is, really. And so if you describe Britain, and again, it's not just Britain, I see it in France, and I see it in Germany, and I see it in various other countries, there is a looming disorder. People recognize that they're the natives, the white native populations of Europe recognize that their way of life is threatened. So that is one reality that you have to acknowledge. Is it threatened or is it not threatened? It is. There are changes happening at a pace that, most of the working classes and the middle classes and other groups, rural groups, are saying this pace is too fast for me. I've got to do something about it. So let's first acknowledge that. Then the second thing we have to acknowledge is that the people we've elected to govern us and to help us navigate these things haven't done a good job of it. The last 30 years, they've opened the borders. They've allowed more immigrants to come in from Muslim-majority countries, while allowing the Islamists to establish themselves and establish this infrastructure of Islamization, and even protecting it, as you say, through this multiculturalism and DEI and et cetera, And the Islamists themselves are now in a place where they think they're large enough and strong enough to have a fighting chance. So you have different factions alive within the borders of many of these European countries that, it's a tinderbox taking shape.
Is that where you think we are? Tinderbox kind of level?
We are going to tinderbox levels and we have a crisis of leadership. So people blame the former government that was conservative for doing things that a majority of the population was saying, please don't do these things, because they didn't invest in the assimilation, in the integration of the people they brought into the country, they allowed into the country. And the dissatisfaction, we're also, I think, going through some sort of economic crisis, and it's when these things come together, when you have the cost of living, and you have a war going on about, it may or may not end, but with Russia and what's going on with Ukraine.
And a trade war now as well.
And now there's a trade war that's going to make things much worse. And so I think that the leadership, the people in Westminster should stop calling people far right, calling them racist. I think it's time to, you do have a royal family, you have a king. And so in America, sometimes we think, our king is Donald Trump. Our head of state is the person we elect.
Yeah.
And that person is almost always more polarizing than we like. So most people will say, see, if it was a constitutional monarch, if they had a king, the king would bring them together to the palace and they would work it out. And so I think maybe a scenario like that, where you bring in all of these leaders and you say, let's work out. We don't want a civil war. Let's work this thing out. I think that might buy you time. But even if you get all the time in the world, you still have to face the fact that the agenda the Islamists are pushing is incompatible with what the locals want. And sooner or later, they're going to stand up to one another.
Yeah. I mean, no amount of talking, I think, resolves this. And certainly King Charles doesn't seem to have his head in the right place, as far as I can see.
I don't know the constitutional system here, and maybe it's not him having his head in some place. Maybe it's him simply not having the power to do anything about it.
I think he doesn't have the power, but his head's definitely not in the right place.
But I mean, I really feel that there is a sense of urgency. I mean, I look at a country like Sweden, also a constitutional monarchy, where the prime minister came out and said, we have lost the monopoly on violence. That it's as if he's describing an African country. It's as if he's describing a third world country. We have lost the monopoly on violence. That means there are large swaths of the citizens of Sweden who no longer care about the police, who no longer care about...
They're living outside the institutional framework.
They're living outside the institutional framework. And if you start to get that in some of the larger countries, and if it becomes Europe-wide, then you're really playing with fire. So I think we stop calling people far-right and extremist and this and that and the other. Release Tommy Robinson. He speaks for a lot of people. Listen very closely to what they're saying. And I have done that. I've done my homework. I've listened to various members of the British working class describe how their neighborhoods changed, how their schools changed, how their economic situation changed, and how they've been completely ignored and even demonized by the political elite that they elected. I mean, the Labour Party of the Social Democratic Party, the centre-left major party of any of these European countries no longer speak for the working classes.
No.
You look at the Jewish communities of Europe and they are frightened. Many of them are leaving some of these countries. You can't go on like this.
No, I appreciate that, but it doesn't seem to me that there's even a single political leader in the UK who would say what you've just said. Even people on my side of the debate, naming no names, say that you can't afford to politically alienate Islam, for example. Recognizing the challenges faced by the country.
Yeah. Don't politically alienate Muslims who want to live by the Constitution and abide by the laws of Britain. But I think you do have to make a decision about Islamism. That is an organized ideology and a movement that wants to replace your constitution with Sharia law. You've got to face that, regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum. That is what they want, and it's a reality, and it's a growing reality.
But I don't see anyone making that case, not yet anyway. I mean, Keir Starmer is busy giving succor to the notion that we need to define Islamophobia, that there perhaps should be laws against blasphemy as far as Abrahamic religions are concerned, which is basically a backdoor towards
authoritarianism.
But
it's also authoritarianism used against it's only going to embolden the Islamists. The Islamists have created this fake word, Islamophobia, and it has the express intention of shutting down debate. So for British citizens to choose whether they want to live by Sharia law or they don't want to live by Sharia law, they should have the opportunity to discuss it. What is it? What is it that the Islamists want? How do they want to get, work through the system to come to power? What am I voting for? What is Islam? How are women treated? How are gay people treated? How are Jewish people treated? You want to ask all of these questions. You can't ask those questions now because you will be accused of Islamophobia.
Yeah.
And the way it advances the Islamist agenda is the Islamist knows that if in 2025 the citizens take an interest in what they want and start asking questions, they will reject it. And so how do you stop the population from rejecting what you want? By stopping them from talking about it, from discussing it, shut it down.
Yeah.
And so that is what Keir Starmer, wittingly or unwittingly, if he were to indeed criminalize what he calls Islamophobia, if that were to happen, then he would be giving.
I mean, we're
Islamist-
almost there, aren't we? You know, with the ability to be detained by police over non-crime hate incidents.
Yeah.
You know, you're almost there through the back door already without having to really legislate for it.
All of this non-crime hate, the Sentencing Commission discriminating against white men and white people, all of these things are going to undermine faith in the institutions, and especially in the leadership and in politics. And so groups within society are going to draw their conclusions. They're going to say, the justice system doesn't work for me. The police system doesn't work for me. The economy doesn't work for me. You're going to see the establishment of more and more parallel societies. And then they will start fighting with one
Do you
another.
think-
And so that is what you are on the brink of. If you carry on...
Yeah.
If you carry on hollowing out the legitimacy of the institutions, then you're going to have the system implode.
Do you mentioned it's urgent that we do it, and I fully agree, it's urgent. Is it too late, or is there time?
I mean, again, it's a choice, isn't it? Like I said, some of the steps that have to be taken are to show the local people. If the government wants, the government in Westminster or in Paris or in Berlin, these governments have to go to the people and say, we take you seriously now. And then show good faith, come to the table and let's talk about what these problems are. If we do that, I think we have time, but it takes courage. And it also takes clarity of mind and clarity of thought. These people are locked up in their little circles, and there's a great deal of groupthink.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's much think going on. If it's groupthink, it's a step forward from where I think.
But I think what about and in one of the things I've seen in the United States that I think, in my view, that has saved us from an implosion of the system is the November 2024 election. We had an election, we were highly polarized, and we had an election. And, you know, there are some people who are not happy with what Trump is doing. I think a lot of people are not happy with what Trump is doing. But they're gearing up for the next election. We have midterms coming in 2026, and then we have in 2028 the next election. I think the system is holding up.
Yeah.
And so here, one thing that might be, when you say what can we do, is maybe all the center-right people who are now in the opposition should go and have a chat about what to do and how to work together.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got to be brave enough, as you say, to identify the issues to start with. And I don't think we've really got there yet. There's a lack of preparedness, I think, from people on our side of the debate, our movement, if you like, to actually say things out clearly without wishing to just cause division for the sake of causing division, you know, just say them out as they are in reality.
Yeah.
But I'm very encouraged you think there's still time and that we've got, you know, we've got an opportunity.
But let's not waste it. There is a bit of time, but let's not waste it. I think people have to imagine what it would look like if the system were to implode. And none of us want the system to fall apart. And so maybe there are, you know, priorities, policy priorities you want that could wait.
Yeah.
First, let's fix the system.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, I don't know whether you'd agree with this, but I think, you know, it's the solution has to come through a holistic, multifaceted approach.
Yes.
We've got to stop the rampant form of immigration taking place. We've got to stop illegal migration. I think we've got to put a moratorium on indefinite leave to remain, granting British citizenships like confetti, encourage people.
The welfare state. You have to reform the welfare state.
Absolutely.
Because you can't have, you know, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people, perhaps even millions of people.
1.5 million foreigners on benefits in the UK.
You see, it's those sorts of things. That's unsustainable.
It's unsustainable. Yeah. Absolutely.
The other thing that I think may give people a sense of urgency is these official numbers that we get. You know, you have so many Muslims in Britain. I think that these numbers are all wrong.
Yeah, it's much greater numbers.
It's much greater
I
numbers.
agree with
the
you,
birth rate is much greater.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just an acknowledgement of reality, however unpleasant it is, to keep things together.
The first thing we've got to do is ditch DEI. One of the funny, I think, not funny, one of the collateral results of DEI, in my view, actually is that Jews become more vulnerable, even though they're theoretically protected by the same progressive discrimination that DEI should afford them, because they're the smallest group of people within the protected status.
Yeah.
They are prone to bullying from other protected statuses.
This is the whole protected status nonsense has to stop.
Yeah, it has to stop.
And I think this is where you get nationalism. I think we've entered an era of deglobalization. We're not globalizing anymore. Read the trade tariffs.
Absolutely.
And maybe whatever confrontation the US is having with China. But as we go back to national sovereignty, national identity, and nationhood, I think let's emphasize nationhood based on citizenship. And that means no one is protected more than anyone. There will be no protected groups. We are all equal before the law. And then you have to ditch all of these legal infrastructure, some of it national and some of it
given to us by international
organizations. You've just got to, you should campaign on that.
I am. I've just written, I don't know if you're aware, but I'm launching a new political party. Are you aware of this?
Well, I'm not aware of it.
No, it's a daft project, no doubt. But I think we absolutely need it, because I won't get into domestic politics, but I was drafting the objects clause of our constitution yesterday, and actually firmly there is everyone is equal. There's only one law in this country, that's UK law, and everyone is equal. In the face of the law, and that's a fundamental component of any sensible system. Frankly, there cannot be any other system which makes sense. And progressive discrimination, the word progressive gives it legitimacy, but actually, progressive discrimination is negative discrimination against the majority. That's what it is.
It's primitivism. It's progress towards primitivism. It's so backward. I don't know why they call it.
Yeah, it's this whole notion of equal outcomes rather than equal opportunities. It's doing away with meritocracy.
But the outcome is always negative.
The outcome is always negative because all you can do is drag everyone down. Absolutely. And that is Labour policy, of course, I would argue.
Yeah.
That is what they do. They like to drag people down. They don't have a vision for taking the country up.
And they like to inverse things. So, they'll call you a racist when, in fact, they're the ones who are implementing racist policies. And
absolutely
this type of thing. And the other thing I think is that's really important, we don't talk enough about it, is the protection of women and children. Again, from my past, in all of those countries that I lived in, women were not protected. And so when I first came to the Netherlands, the first thing that struck me, Ben, was it's just amazing that women can walk in the streets dressed as they please at daytime or nighttime, and that's gone. That's gone in almost all European countries that have substantial numbers of immigrants from where I come from.
I'm stunned by it. 100 years into equating men and women at the ballot box and bringing them onto the same level playing field, liberalism has somehow managed to convince us that putting a woman from head to toe in a niqab is perfectly acceptable because that is her choice.
It's not her choice.
It's not her choice.
Be her choice.
And if the government was going to make a statement of its intent, the first thing to do is ban the niqab, in my view.
The niqab, most people don't understand. This is why I think I'm against, nonsense propaganda machines like Islamophobia. The niqab, I don't know if anybody's ever had a chance to actually discuss what it is and what it does and what it's supposed to do. The female form is seen to be arousing for the male. And the way Sharia law or Islamic law deals with it is simply to say, why don't we hide her from view? Well, she can't be at home locked up all day long. Some of these women have to go about their daily routines and daily business. So as soon as she leaves the house, she should be covered from head to toe. And there is a lot of discussion a lot of it exhausting and fascinating, about how much of the female body you have to cover, how much of it, which part of the body stops to be arousing, to drive men so crazy as to throw themselves at her. And so you have these discussions
might try and
where
control
they say,
the men a bit.
well, and of course, this is what we've seen in modern life, is you can actually socialize men to be civilized and to control their urges and not to jump on women.
No.
So one of the things that's so upsetting about the failure of assimilation from, I know there are societies out there where the attitude towards women is different, but once those men come here, and they come in large numbers, and it's fighting age men, it's the responsibility of the host society to assimilate those men. In other words, to civilize them. In other words, to spell out that they have to learn to control their urges. We're not going to cover up women, and we're not going to lock up women. And if you misbehave, we're going to deport you. That, I think, should have been the trade-off. That should have been the social contract between the immigrants and host society.
But we've done the opposite of that. We've done the polar opposite of that.
Yeah.
Integration doesn't form any part of the agenda.
No, and the Islamists are now overconfident. I'm sorry. They feel that they are improving British society or French society and so on.
What I find quite peculiar, I think we probably need to end quite soon, we're probably out of time, but what I find quite peculiar and sinister, actually, is the way a lot of these Islamists have allied themselves to the transgender ideology movement because they are comfortable bedfellows for their political aims at the moment.
Yes.
But the transgender lot haven't cottoned on to the fact that if Islamism takes over,
they'll be beheaded.
They'll be the first ones for the proverbial or actual chop. Absolutely, yeah.
It's unfortunate because there are people with gender dysphoria. And the people with gender dysphoria, I think, are not the ones who are the activists behind this ideology. The people pushing the ideology may or may not have gender dysphoria. In fact, I suspect many of them don't. Most of them don't. And the Islamists are quite cunning. And they have made these temporary alliances because, again, I think you may have heard of taqiyya.
Yeah, the going underground and...
Yes, it's the concept of deception. As long as you're advancing Islam and you're working towards the Islamization process of a society, if the host society is bigger, it's the kuffar, the infidels are bigger and they are stronger, then you are allowed to be deceitful, to be deceptive. And so that explains the relationship that they have formed with the far left, with the LGBTQ and so on communities, but also with Labour. And you see some of these, at times when no one is looking, you see them sometimes clash. We saw them with the Gaza protests when some of the MPs here found themselves in precarious places. And in America, we've seen it, I think, much more openly when suddenly the Democratic Party was confronted with losing the election because of a small group of Muslims who said, we're not going to come, we will stay at home, we're not going to vote.
It becomes pivotally important.
Yeah.
I mean, democracy often is made or won at the periphery, isn't it?
Yes.
Power is made and won at the periphery.
Yes,
so.
And the Islamists know this. The Islamists know exactly how to use diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how to subvert the various institutions that we have. And so that's why we have to have a sense of urgency to wake up, because this monster is getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And so you can't just sit there and wait for it to swallow you.
No. Yeah. And, I hope that my new political party should have some success. And, we will abolish DEI, abolish the Equalities Act, and I think have a very, abolish, frankly, the Human Rights Act, which has taken the European Convention of Human Rights into the body of UK law, and set aside our ability, I think, to think straight. We don't even really know what we are as a culture anymore. Yeah. We've been hijacked by these laws and so on, and I think we need a restoration of common sense and a restoration of, of the United Kingdom.
My advice is I've seen in the last, 30 or so years, new parties spring up and then die an early death. And I think the investment really is in competent people. And
I
people
agree.
who put the country first and not
I couldn't
the
agree
little
more.
egos. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And I won't give away the constitution of my new party on air right now.
Yeah.
But it's structured precisely to deliver that outcome. So that we have a body of very capable, educated, fearless people who will make the case along the lines we've been discussing during this interview.
Wonderful.
Can I just say that, it's been a great privilege to speak to you, Ayaan, and thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me. And, I think the challenge is massive, and I hope we can have a peaceable, sustainable, democratic British future in the United Kingdom and in Western civilization more generally. Yeah.
Thank you. And I'd like to invite you to come to my podcast to talk to me about the constitution of your party and the way you hope to make those changes that you aspire to achieve.
I'd love to do that.
Yeah.
I hope to have the constitution done and everything sort of, ready for launch in the next couple of months. So maybe after that, I'd love to come back and have another chat with you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you for the chat.